Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and I am very happy to be back, and I hope that you have been doing great lately. As you may have noticed, I don't have weekly uploads anymore. I am aiming for once every other week because I'm going to start a job very soon and I will just have way less free time. And the other thing is, I haven't really felt any motivation to be talking about true crime, murder, torture, and destruction any more than what we already see every single day on the news. As you may most likely know, there is a war going on in Ukraine, which is in our neighbor. And it is one thing seeing this on the news, and it's another thing seeing this happen so close to home. I don't feel competent or qualified in any way to talk about the current political situation in other countries or to talk about history. I'm just simply not qualified to do that. But one thing I think should be obvious to everybody, which is the civilians are never the problem. The people who just try to live their lives, take their kids to school, figure out what to cook the next day are never the problem. And the Ukrainian people are definitely not deserving of what is happening to them. They shouldn't have to pay for the crimes of Putin. Whatever you decide to post in the comments or in social media, whatever you think you know, just remember that it's not Russia against Ukraine. It's the world against Putin, and I am confident in saying that. He has caused a lot of misery for a lot of people, and just keep that in mind when you pass judgment on the soldiers or the civilians in Russia. They are just as misled, and they are silenced, and they are not allowed to protest. And if they do so, they pay greatly for it. And the Ukrainians just try to escape this all. Many of them stay behind and fight for their country, which is admirable, but many of them decide to leave while they still can. And I understand everybody's sides. So please be kind. Please be always nice and understanding. I highly encourage everybody who is capable to donate money. I'm going to link some charities down below that I find reputable, and I think if you have just a single dollar or a single euro, that would help a lot. Here in Hungary, there is a civil movement to try to help the refugees as much as we possibly can. I know hundreds of thousands of people are trying to help the people who come across the border. The railway has given out free train tickets all over the continent. Wizz Air is flying 100,000 people for free. People are giving them shelter, food, blankets, clothes, and I'm just so happy to see how we are able to help them in some way, that we don't have to just sit laying back on our comfortable chairs while we are looking at people lose their homes, lose their family members, lose their lives. So if you are able to just donate $1 or do anything other than just writing hashtag I'm with Ukraine, I think that would be a very valuable help. So that is it. I think I'm going to continue posting every other week, but I am not giving myself a deadline because I'm going to be very busy, and the more time I spend on the cultivation of this channel, the more I realize how depressive it really is. And sometimes I just need to take a break. So anyway, let's get started with the story, and I hope that you will like this one. Before the 90s, Ernő was no stranger to the police. He was a living legend amongst criminals for his possession of stolen property. It is for sure that he ended up with majority of the stolen artifacts that mysteriously disappeared from museums and private collections. But now he was a 65-year-old old man. Until one morning he was found murdered, his face covered in tape. It was the 16th of May, 1990, 7:30 a.m., that Yuriy arrived at Ernő's apartment. He was probably wondering how many more times it was going to take him to finally convince, coerce, or maybe force Ernő to give back what rightfully belonged to him. He had visited him on many occasions in the last couple of weeks, including the night before, or he tried, had Ernő opened the door to him, but he didn't. He tried to get in the apartment for about 15 minutes, but in the end he gave up. Whatever Yuriy thought, he was going to come back the next morning and try again. The two had a lot of beef because Ernő disgustingly cheated and conned poor Yuriy. You see, Yuriy was a Russian man, and he had $1 million violin, an original Carlo Bergonzi. Back in Moscow, somebody recommended that he comes to Hungary and visits Ernő, who was famous for being able to resell stolen artifacts or very valuable things that were not supposed to be sold. Ernő was very happy indeed to make business with Yuriy. He took the violin, but he forgot to give it back, he forgot to pay for it, and he forgot to sell it for him. He came up with all kinds of excuses, like that the violin was stolen, or that it was broken, or that he just hadn't managed to find a good buyer for it. But you can imagine now Yuriy realized how big of a mistake he made by just handing over $1 million violin to a conman who was not gonna pay for it and was not going to give it back. Yuriy decided that he wanted to get his violin back no matter what. So that morning he had returned to the apartment again to end this once and for all. He tried the doorknob and, to his biggest surprise, it was open. The door opened. How could this be? Last night the door was definitely locked and Ernő had to have been inside, purposefully ignoring Yuriy's knocks, screams and calls. But now the door wasn't even locked, like it was just there open. So Yuriy entered the apartment and he took his direction to the living room, but it wasn't an easy task because Ernő was kind of a hoarder of these stolen artifacts. Every room was filled with them from the floor to the ceiling. And he had all kinds of crazy things, like a chandelier made of pure Meissen porcelain, literally invaluable. And he also had books with Martin Luther's handwriting. So Yuriy finally made his way to the living room, and there he saw something that he wasn't prepared for. The 65-year-old Ernő was lying on the living room floor on his back with a pillow on his chest and his head completely covered in tape, fully covered. It means that he had suffocated and died. Only God knows how long he had been lying there. But Yuriy knew that he should not go any closer. This was a murder scene and he didn't want to leave any of his DNA or footprints or fingerprints there. So he was just about to leave the apartment and run to get help. But in that same instant, he heard someone else enter the apartment through the front door. He looked there and he saw a man that he recognized as Ernő's doctor, his personal doctor. So convenient, he thought. A doctor shows up at the murder scene. It would be obvious that the doctor was going to have to run and help, call for help, do something. But the doctor didn't do any of that. He entered the apartment and Yuriy pointed into the direction of Ernő's body because Yuriy couldn't speak any Hungarian. The doctor approached the body, saw what was going on, and then entered the kitchen Something made the clicking sound once, twice, then took his bag and left the apartment in a hurry. Yuriy just stood there confused, like this didn't make any sense. Maybe this doctor somehow knew that Ernő was eventually gonna get himself killed, or maybe this doctor had something that he wanted back from Ernő. After all, he took something from the kitchen and then left the scene in a hurry. Because after all, it is quite clear that the violin was not the first thing that Ernő appropriated from someone. Yuriy had no other idea than to leave the apartment and go to the first pedestrian for help. 2 hours later, the police were already deep into the investigation at the scene. The tape that was all over Ernő's head had SM Messebau repeating logo on it, which is manufactured and used by a Swiss exhibition organizing company. And this by itself is nothing special. You can come across this kind of a tape in Hungary and in a lot of other countries, but one thing was notable. This Messebau tape was red, and it was exclusively used in the Soviet Union. Not a good look for Yuriy, who was from the Soviet Union. The theory is the following. The killer or killers must have forced their way into the apartment where they attacked this elderly man. They taped his mouth shut with this Messebau tape so that he couldn't scream. They probably kept him like this for some time while they questioned him about where he kept what the killers were looking for. Assumably, Ernő could answer these questions by nodding or shaking his head. When they were finally finished with the questioning, they probably taped the rest of his face, including his nose, that resulted in his death. In the forensic doctor's opinion, he suffered no other injuries, and the pillow was most likely placed on his chest so that his killer could kneel on top of him. Ernő's miserable death took about 15 minutes. The first and most obvious suspect was Yuriy. After all, he was the one to discover the crime scene, he had no other alibi, and he was from the same country that the tape that was used to kill Ernő was from. But luckily for him, he was quickly eliminated as a suspect. There were witnesses backing his story up that he had absolutely no desire for any more money, he didn't want to take any artifacts, he only wanted to get the violin back that Ernő stole from him. And luckily for him, he even managed to get it back. You see, the police actually found this violin in Ernő's vacation home in the countryside, and they didn't see any reason to keep it, they just gave it back to Yuriy. Now, I would have thought that the police would either keep it as evidence or probably auction it off for themselves for their own profit, but they didn't do that. The police just gave this violin back to Yuriy, and he was even eliminated as a suspect. It couldn't have been any better for this guy. But we can't really say the same for this mysterious doctor. The police tracked him down and they took him in for a questioning. Now, during his first questioning, he ran into a lot of contradictions and acted really weird, so they called him in for another questioning only 2 days later. The weirdest thing about him was that he avoided eye contact at all costs and he kept fidgeting. He was visibly anxious and nervous, especially when he was asked about his car. The police thought that he may not have been the killer, but he definitely knew something. So the investigators searched his car, and guess what they found? Under the driver's seat, they found a bag full of cash. So he was arrested for the suspicion of Ernő's murder, just so that they could keep him there for longer and continue the investigation. First of all, they asked him why he showed up at Ernő's apartment by taxi, which wasn't characteristic to this doctor, and only half an hour before he was going to go to work at his practice. He apparently wanted to get the money back that Ernő owed him. You see, according to this doctor's story, Ernő and him had been friends for a long time, and they had always planned on opening an antique shop. But this plan was never really going anywhere. Now, the doctor had borrowed a lot of money from somebody that he went on to lend to Ernő for whatever reason. But now we know Ernő didn't really like to pay back. So he just simply refused to pay the money back to the doctor. And this doctor had tried to get this money back for a long time, and when he entered the apartment that morning with the same intention, and he saw that Ernő finally met his fate, he got himself killed, which he had been working on for a very long time with all of the enemies that he had made for himself. The doctor saw this as the only chance to get the money back. He was otherwise never going to see this money ever again. He knew that Ernő usually kept cash under the kitchen sink. That's why he entered the kitchen, and the clicking sound was the cabinet door opening and closing. Now, here are the numbers. The doctor lent Ernő 280,000 German marks, which was the then currency. And according to a witness, Ernő kept 300,000 marks under that kitchen sink. But the doctor insisted that under the kitchen sink he only found 30,000 marks, not 300,000 marks. And this witness, who claimed that there was 300,000 marks there, well, more on that later, because that person is also a person of interest. In the end, and I am not sure about why, but this doctor was sentenced to 3 years in prison, of which he only had to serve 4 months. Now, I would assume that maybe it was for probably not rushing to help on a murder scene, and it was not only his civilian diligence, but also his Hippocratic oath. Maybe it was for taking the money that he couldn't really prove as his own, and by the way, that money could have been evidence, so maybe it was for tampering with evidence at the crime scene, maybe it was for deception, but in the end, the police could not actually link him to the murder, and he was not a suspect in the murder. But then, who did it? Who could have it been? Finding that out was no easy task, because no less than 370 people were in direct contact with Ernő on a regular basis. And I'm not just talking about his family and friends and business partners, aka the people that he either owed money to or stole something from. Because of his criminal past and present, and his dangerous liking for stolen artifacts, he made a lot of enemies. Anyone could have wanted him dead. It wasn't until Nyina came forward to the police with some information. Nyina was a Russian lady who married a Hungarian man, and she was currently living in Hungary. She was considerably younger than Ernő, but they were still good friends. So good friends, but it is unknown if they also had a love affair. But it is also a known fact that at one point she had been Ernő's personal assistant, and they had this kind of an intimate trust between them. It was so much so that the day before Ernő was killed, they went to the bank together and took out that 300,000 German marks from Ernő's account. Therefore, Nyina was the witness who could testify that he kept that 300,000 marks under the kitchen sink, because she was the one to count the money on multiple occasions that day. Ernő needed this money because he wanted to buy a bigger apartment, as the current one was getting a bit too crowded with all of the clutter and his hoarded stolen artifacts. Nyina told the police that she went back to his apartment that same evening, of the same day that they took out the money, but the day before that Ernő was killed. But Ernő didn't open up the door to her either, just like he didn't do so to Yuriy. And she made the same assumption that Yuriy did that Ernő must have had been at home in the apartment because his car, which was an Audi 90, was parked in front of the building. Now, it is important to mention that Ernő never really parked his car for an extended period of time in front of his home, since on one occasion one of his enemies poured acid on it. So he always stored his car overnight at a nearby parking lot. But now the car was parked in front of his home and even the car's radio was on. So it looked a lot like Ernő just ran up to his apartment real quick to get something but was gonna come down soon and either repark his car at the usual parking lot or just leave and go somewhere altogether. And Nyina waited there between 8 p.m. and 9:30 p.m., so for an hour and a half. But nothing happened. Ernő never left the apartment, he didn't open the door, and his car was still parked in front of the apartment building with the radio on. Now, during this time that she waited there, Nyina witnessed Yuriy arriving and trying to get in the apartment, knocking on the door, calling out for Ernő's name, and trying to get in for about 15 minutes. But Nyina never once approached Yuriy. This is a very weird and strange thing, because two Russians in such a tiny country like Hungary, where Russians don't usually have anything to do, they don't usually come here unless they have something very specific to do, they surely would have known each other personally, especially because they were both the close acquaintances of Ernő. And Nyina and Ernő had such an intimate and close friendship, Ernő surely must have mentioned Yuriy and his $1 million violin to Nyina at some point. But even if the two didn't know each other personally for some reason, Nyina may have wanted to find out what this guy trying to break into Ernő's apartment at night, what he wanted while he was there. But still, Nyina didn't care, didn't approach him, and she just waited outside for an hour and a half before she decided to leave. Because at 9:30 she had somewhere to go. Nyina left to a petrol station and bought a 5-liter bottle of oil that she was going to send to her friend back in Russia via the ticket usher who worked on the train to Moscow that same night. A complex story, I know. This didn't make any sense. Why would someone send a 5-liter bottle of oil all the way from Hungary to Russia? Even if the price was that much cheaper here, which it wasn't, why only 5 liters? If they wanted to smuggle oil, they surely could have found out a more effective way where they can send it for cheaper than through a ticket usher on a train and for bigger quantities than just 5 liters. But the police looked into it and her timeline checked out. There was only one thing though. Nyina bought the 5-liter bottle of oil, the kind where the cap could be popped up and pushed back without leaving a trace. It wasn't a screw, there was no safety label on it, so there was no way to know what was really in it or if somebody had opened that bottle before. So it looked a lot like Nyina knew something that she wasn't telling to the police. She became even more suspicious when the Hungarian police received information about her from the Soviet police. Nyina was part of an organized crime group that had a hand in the disappearance of 10% of all the raw diamonds mined in the Soviet Union, which was a very big business in the mafia. Ernő had a special spot for diamonds in his heart. So it started to look like Nyina was not waiting for an hour and a half in front of Ernő's apartment just for her friend to come out to play. No, much more like Nyina was waiting outside while the two hitmen that she hired were questioning, torturing and killing Ernő, trying to figure out where he kept the diamonds that he must have taken from them. And she was also not sitting and waiting in her car. She was waiting on the other side of the street in the dark. So she definitely must have seen Yuriy arrive at the scene and trying to get in for about 15 minutes at the same time as the hitmen were probably torturing this poor old man to death to find out where he kept the diamonds. And of course, this was the reason why she didn't approach Yuriy, because then she probably would have blown her cover. But the next day she realized that maybe Yuriy saw her standing in the dark, or maybe he saw her car that was parked right next to Ernő's. And that was the only reason why she even came forward to the police, giving her made-up story about her version of the events, so that she could control the narrative and prevent Yuriy giving away that she was there at the scene. But she was wrong, because Yuriy didn't see her and her car, or if he did, then he didn't recognize it. After the two hitmen were finished with the dirty job, Nyina hid the diamonds in the oil bottle and went to the train station to give it to the ticket usher, a man named Yuriy Kostyushenko. And this was not the same Yuriy as the one mentioned previously. And this ticket usher was going to work on the train to Moscow at 11:55 that night. The Hungarian police were constantly surveilling the borders and the trains for this ticket usher, and so did the Soviet police. But Kostyushenko never stepped foot in Hungary ever again, at least not under this name. The two hitmen, who were supposed to be from Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, also left Hungary by the same train to Moscow, and they never showed up ever again. So you may wonder how helpful the Soviet police were in this case. Well, in the beginning they were, but then all of a sudden they lost all interest in the case and stopped cooperating and sharing information. Maybe they caught the criminals and did or did not persecute them. Maybe they were paid off or somehow forced to drop the investigation. But in any case, the KGB never released any specific names. The only information we have after this is that one of the hitmen died in a gang fight somewhere in Baku, and the other hitman alongside with Nyina just disappeared in Russia, which is a very big country to just disappear in. Sadly, all of this above-mentioned information is just speculation. The Hungarian police never caught anyone, no one was charged for anything, and technically Ernő's death is still an unsolved murder. But I personally find this theory about the Russian hitman, the diamonds, and Nyina a very feasible one, because after the police searched through Ernő's apartment, they still found dozens of diamonds just in the apartment that the hitman probably didn't find. Imagine if these criminals left behind so many diamonds, then how many did they find that they were satisfied with, and how much money was just in this mafia business. I cannot pass judgment on anyone, and I cannot and will not say if Ernő deserved to pay with his life for the crimes that he had committed. But don't forget that he was a thief, and he was a criminal for the decades beforehand. And in the end, he still fell victim to this ginormous spider that the Soviet mafia is. That is the end of this case, and I am looking forward to see what you think of this. Don't forget to tell us all of your opinions down in the comment section. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, if you would like to see more videos like this from me from now on twice a month, and I hope to see you again. Bye!